Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop, and today we're making a thumb piano. This is Bolivian rosewood. It is very different from traditional Brazilian or Honduran rosewood. This is a good, sustainable wood that you can use with a clear conscience. And it's getting easier and easier to find. And I got a piece of this from my local sawyer. He actually imported a pallet of it and had a pretty decent sale on it. So I've got a couple sticks that I'm going to be using, and I thought this would be a great chance, especially as it's very commonly used in the musical world because it has a beautiful look and it's a nice sounding wood. So we're going to use this for the top and bottom plates of our thumb piano. To do so, we're going to resaw it down, and I want to take it down to something a little bit thinner than a 1/4 inch. I think it's at like 3/16 of an inch. So I'm going to start by cutting both of these pieces out of one blank and ripping them down with my large handsaw. And this one you can see I was a little bit off the corner, so if you bring in a file and work it back over, and you can start it right where you want to be. It's very important to start it off in the right location so that you can get the rest of it nice and clean. So for resawing this, I'm going to cut one side corner to corner and then flip it around, and I'll put some shims on the opposite side corner to corner, and this will allow me to cut down the other way. And I can do both of these at one time. And then once we cut a little ways, we're through. And just like that, we have 3 pieces. The middle one I'm going to set aside for a future project. And then these other 2 pieces we're going to turn into the front and back faces of the piano. We're left with all these saw marks, and those are pretty easy to clean up. I like working with these aluminum dogs. They allow me to cut very easily without fear of running into them, because if you hit them, then they actually plane very nicely. And I have had a few times where oh, look at that, there's a little aluminum shaving. And they work out pretty well. So I'm going to start with my 4.5 set very, very coarsely, and then come in with my smoothing plane and detail them down, because the grain on this tends to go all over the place. For the side structure, we're going to be using this quarter sawn sycamore. And if you've ever worked with sycamore, it is a really nice wood to work with. It's very, very easy. It's very forgiving, very smooth. Quarter sawn can be a little bit crunky. You have to worry about some of the grain direction, but it is an enjoyable wood to work with. It would be a great beginner wood because it is so easy to work. It works a lot like cherry. But with this quarter sawn, that grain on there is really beautiful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on making some thin pieces that will basically separate the front and back faces and then run all the way around the box. So I'm cutting it down to the thickness that I want, and then I can resaw these into a couple blanks, and each of these blanks will then be the thickness I have. You can see I'm trying to make it so the rings go across the board. This will make it far more stable so it expands and contracts less. We're going to need 4 of these pieces. 2 long ones will go down the side, and 2 shorter ones will go on the top and bottom of the box, or the front and back, I guess, depending upon what orientation you put this on. We're going to plane these down nice and smooth. I want to make sure that the 2 faces are parallel, and we turn them into square stock. Originally, my stock was fairly well twisted, and so we had to start by smoothing one face down and then cleaning them out and then coming back in and shaping them down. This block will actually end up being 2 pieces rather than just 1, and we'll cut it down to its full length. Again, making sure you're going with the grain, because if you go against the grain with this stuff, it will tear out on you. It is very chip prone. So now we need to rip these down into making them the correct height. So this will be the thickness at which we separate the front and back pieces, or the top and bottom pieces, depending upon what orientation you put. Next, we'll cut them to exact lengths. Now, the kit I have, which I'll leave links to that down below, it gives dimensions and measurements on all of this. And the measurements are free. The kit is actually surprisingly affordable. And so if you're looking for a fun little musical instrument to mess around with and not having to worry about making it absolutely perfect, this is a great way to get into it. It's a nice, simple one and goes together. You can see how these pieces go together on here, and they'll separate the bottom from the top piece. The top of this is wider. It actually should be the bottom is wider and the top is thinner, but I flipped it around in the end, so oh well. We're going to shoot these down, but here you can see I'm actually using a shim to shoot to 2 ends of the top and bottom one. As these side panels will be at an angle, we need to taper those slightly. So I found the door shim was actually really close to the angle they need to be. To put this all together, I'm going to be using 5-minute epoxy. Normally I would do hide glue with this. For musical instruments, hide glue is really nice because if you want to take it apart, you can. But in this case, this is not going to be an heirloom piece. This is not something that's going to be very valuable in the future. It's just going to be something I'm having fun with. And I'm kind of teaching myself and experimenting and playing with different things. And also I want to get this video out in a timely manner, so they're going to turn this into a one-day project to put it all together. And to do that, which means you need glue that will cure up and be fully cuttable. So we use 5-minute epoxy. But if I were doing this to set it aside, I would probably use hide glue because that's the proper glue to use for musical instruments. And it's actually kind of a fun glue if you've got the time to do it. But 5-minute epoxy will work perfectly fine. We're going to clamp these on here, and I'm going to put them roughly close to where they are. The other nice thing with epoxy is you don't need a lot of clamping pressure. It's the same with hide glue. You don't need an incredible amount of clamping pressure. You just need enough to hold it in place. If you're using PVA, you really need to clamp it down. That requires clamping pressure in order for it to lock down. With PVA, you'll never squeeze out the glue. With epoxy, you have to be careful of that because you can over squeeze it and squeeze it out. At this point, it's a lot of just fiddling it, getting it exactly where I want it, and locking the pieces down, making sure everything's in there, and then a couple clamps to squeeze the two sides together and hold those in place. We're going to set this aside and then start working on the rest of this. And here, oh, what's this? This is white oak. Why do I need a piece of white oak? Well, we're actually going to be making, there's more than just the front, back, and sides. We also need to make the bridge that holds everything on, and then there's a little soundboard inside. This will be the little soundboard inside, and this is what that bridge actually attaches to. All this block does is support the back of the bridge that everything is held to, and the bolts will actually go through the bridge, through the top face, and then into this, and so it holds everything in place so you're not just bolting to the thin surface of the top plate. So it's nothing very special, but I had some white oak and I thought let's use some white oak on this. You can see this is the bridge, and it does come with a kit. It's made out of maple, and it is a very delicately shaped piece, so they made sure to provide one that was really nice, and you can use that to then mark out exactly where your holes are. That will actually go through this and then through the main face and then be bolted into the back. So we need to drill out the holes for that. And again, all of these measurements are marked out precisely in the drawings. We do need a larger diameter hole for the screw head to go into, and that needs to be a specific distance. So I was actually using my depth setters on the bit to get it close to where I want, and that actually ended up being exactly where I want it, so I didn't have to move them, which is kind of nice. We're going to drill out the larger hole that the washer then fits into, and so you can see how these steps are all slightly different. This does actually get glued onto the inside of the top face, and so before gluing that in place, we're going to lock it down. Now, because this actually will get bolted in place and I've got time to do it, I'm going to go use regular glue on this. I was planning on using hide glue, but for some reason I grabbed my regular PVA glue, and that's where it's at. But the nice thing is I'm going to be bolting this in place, and so I don't have to worry about clamping it. I don't have to really worry about that much strength or pressure, just locking it into place. You can see how the bolts will go through, and then inside in the kit it has these nuts that will lock into the structure inside the piece we just made. So we can actually use these bolts and the nut to hold this in place and act as the clamps to lock everything down. They don't have to be incredibly tight, but they do have to be somewhat tight. Now I need to drill a hole through the top soundboard so that the sound can get out. And it specifies a specific side, and they do have special little fill-in pieces that you can put in their scroll work. I wanted to leave mine open, but it's a very, very big hole, and for that I actually need to use a hole saw. And yes, you can use a hole saw with hand tools. It's not pretty and it's not easy, but it does work. And if you can't get it big enough to go with a regular bit, this works out very well. And with how thin this is, I really didn't want to use an expanding bit. I just wanted to drill it out. So I drilled through a scrap piece and then locked it all into place, and then used that scrap piece to hold the bit in place so that it didn't wander around on me. And I could use that to then saw through the work until it popped through. And yay, there it is. I could have left a little bit cleaner cut. I was initially thinking, oh, I'll cut from one side and then cut from the other side, and then I realized, wait, I'm all the way through. So oops. I can come in with a chisel and chamfer out the inside edge of this, running around the inside of the donut. And then for a little bit of detail, I got a V-tool, marked out a circle running all the way around that, and then just carved a little V detail. And I really like how this came out. And anytime you can do a little bit of carving, it's fun. I thought about doing some Celtic weave on the back or some other face, but in the end decided not to. And of course, like any instrument, you need to mark inside the date you made it and put your maker's mark. So inside the box, before actually gluing it all up, I wrote down the date that we actually made this piece. And again, this is a really nice, simple, one-day build. It really only took me, I think it was, 2.5 hours total to make this box from beginning to end. And doing it with the 5-minute epoxy, we could do it all one day. Otherwise, we just had to set it aside. And then for my maker's mark, put this in. And yes, this is a demon-possessed branding iron. I don't know why that cord is on the back. It's for hanging it up, but why that gets in the way. One of these days, I'll cut that off. Next, it's time to glue the top face in, and so for that we're going to mix up a little more epoxy so that we can finish it up today. I'm going to whip this up and put it on all the surfaces, and I'm not caring too much about squeeze out. Again, I'm not making a really professional nice piece. If I wanted to make something that was very classic or longevity, I would have done it very differently. I would have taken some more time and done some more cleanup on it. But this one was just an experimentation on trying something different. And so we can put this into place, clamp it down, and then once it's done, we can trim everything up. You can see I'm leaving the outside very, very rough. That way we can just clean it all up at one time. I don't want to worry about the outside being nice and clean. I even left the quarter sawn sycamore rough on the outside. It still has these saw marks on it. So everything on the outside was left rough so I could come back and clean it up. But the inside was smoothed out before the glue up. Now I don't need this many clamps on here, but I thought for video's sake it would be kind of fun to put every clamp I have. No, it's not every clamp. It's maybe 1/10 of the clamps I have because you can never have enough clamps. One more, but one more on there. Yeah, that's better. It needs that. So we can set this aside, and by the time we have all the clamps on, it's time to take all of the clamps off, and then we can do all the final touches on this. We could put the bridge on it and it would be a functioning piece at this moment. So from here on out, it's just making things look pretty, and you can do a lot to make a tool pretty. We need to smooth everything down. There's a lot of epoxy, squeeze out, and then we have the top and bottom that are larger. So I'm going to come in with my scrub plane and remove most of the material very, very quickly with the scrub plane. Gets it down right up to the edge. Then I can come in with my rough plane and get it very, very close, and then come with the smoothing plane and take the last few passes. And I love the chatoyancy that pops out on this quarter sawn sycamore. It looks beautiful. Seeing all of those rays and the contrast in itself. It's a very, very nice wood to work with, and you haven't had a chance to work with sycamore, find some and play with it. It's very enjoyable. We're going to chamfer up all of the corners, and I'm going to put a fairly heavy chamfer all the way around. This little piece had popped out, and so before we go too much farther, I'm going to put in some thin epoxy and then set it and make sure I glue it to my thumb because, yeah, why not? Go back onto the chamfering and smoothing and the last little details and bring this all down into shape. You can see how the chamfers, I'm getting them close to getting all the way through the top and bottom. I like that little look on there, and it feels relatively good in the hand. 1 or 2 more passes with the smoothing plane on the outside edges, and the surfaces on this are basically ready for it. I did come in with a card scraper and clean up a little bit on the main face, front and back, as those had some marks. The rosewood is a very, very hard wood, so it takes a really nice shine to it if you can get it very, very smooth. And card scrapers are phenomenal for very dense woods. But to do this, I needed to clamp it up, and so I wanted to grab some quick little blocks to put in between the dogs because I realized I needed to clamp it up, and I already finished the outside edges. So we chop off some small pieces of random scrap I have, put it in between the dogs, and now I can scrape it off very nicely without having to worry about it moving around. And I love how really hard woods scrape beautifully. You can get some incredibly smooth edges. This is the maple bridge that came, and I'm going to sand it down, make it just get rid of the burrs and any little imperfections on it. I am going to sand all the surfaces even though I scraped and planed. Sometimes this will show me, oh, there's a plane track or something I need to remove out and scrape a little bit more. Or there's something I need to come back and clean it out. But the big thing is the sanding actually allows the oil to soak in a little bit farther into the wood. It clogs the pores, but that clogging actually will wick the oil down in a little farther. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it helps it to seal in a little bit better. So for the finish on this, I'm going to use boiled linseed oil and paste wax. I know, really surprising. There are lots of other things I could have done. I could have coated it with shellac or done some traditional finishes on there, and I just like the look of this. And again, this isn't a professional piece. This is just what I want, and so I'm going to let it soak up as much of this as it wants, and then apply the paste wax on top of it. And I love how this rosewood just really gleams with it. It comes out very, very beautifully. So now we can put it all together, and this is a surprisingly fun instrument to put all the hardware in. There is a metal tube that holds them down, and then they're braced against this metal rod on the front. And however far they stick out past that metal rod determines their tune. And so you actually slide them in and out to adjust it, and then once they get close, just tighten them down a tad farther. So you space them out, and it comes with a little jig that allows you to see how far they should come out. It gets you relatively close. Then I can download an app on my phone to get it right where I want it to be and actually tune them up. And it takes a very, very delicate hand, because the slightest movement in or out will change the tone, sometimes by a whole note. And the lowest note is the one in the middle, and they go every other on either side to get higher and higher until you get to the outside. And so you can just go through them one at a time and tune them up. And just like that, you have a musical instrument. So I guess I need to learn how to play it now, right? Well, new channel, Tunes by Wright. Well, let's see what we can do. So this is kind of a fun thing. I'll have a link to the kit down below. It's relatively affordable, and it is a really cool project to kind of play around. And if you want to make some noise, yep, and there you go. I really enjoyed this. This is kind of fun. I ended up accidentally making mine backwards. It should be fatter at the bottom and thinner at the top, but I didn't notice that until I put it all together. So yeah, everyone makes mistakes. Am I going to be a concert thumb pianist? No. So it really doesn't matter too much to me, but I would love to hear from you if you've done anything different. I really loved working with this sustainable rosewood and the sycamore sides. That came out great. I love the look on that. So I'm going to be having a little bit of fun experimenting, play around, and I'll let the kids try their hand at it as well, and it'll be an interesting thing for all of us. So I hope you like that. If you would like to find out more information about this, I have links to the kits and other things down below. Or if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, snide remarks, or just want to say comment down below, you know what to do. Thank you, that helps out the channel. As well as hitting the like, share, subscribe, and thank you over here. That means more than I can say. It does help us get in front of more people, and it is a wonderful benefit to the channel. Thank you for that. Taking it even farther, there are names over here. Those names are specific people who are fantastic, wonderful, and benevolent people over on Patreon. Without patrons, we wouldn't exist. We are completely sponsored by you, the viewers and patrons. Thank you. You keep the lights on, you keep us going, and if you would like to help out with that, think about becoming a patron. I'll leave links to that down below as well, and I think that'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. I don't often like my projects this much, but this one I definitely have to give 2 thumbs up.